for attending today's webinar, Creating a Great Journal Website, Ingredients for Success. Today we'll talk about many aspects of a successful website launch. My name is Ann Stone of TBI Communications, and I'll be facilitating today's session. For the webinar today, I've included the dial-up and attendee access code information on the footer of all slides. We recommend dialing up by phone. If you have any trouble with the audio during the course of this session, please dial in with the information provided. Attendees will be on mute for this session. To ask a question or communicate with us, please use the chat box or question box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. We will be monitoring the questions and encourage you to ask them during the session. As best as we can, we'll select questions at the end of the presentation. If we can't get to them, we'll be following up personally after the webinar. At the end of the webinar today, you should have some ideas for how to make your own website launch successful, both in the context of delivering a website that offers a great reader experience and managing a successful website launch as a project. Today we have with us Maya Summers, Senior Technical Project Manager at HighWire Press. She's a Certified Project Manager, PMP, and Scrum Master, CMS. Maya collaborates with clients to translate business requirements into technical specifications to develop websites, web applications, and other integrated technologies. Maya is responsible for all aspects of web projects, including planning, schedule management, communication, user acceptance, and delivery. In addition to working with American Society for Enology and Viticulture with our guest Raquel Abad today, Maya has recently worked with American Academy of Pediatrics, Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, Royal College of Psychiatrists, the British Editorial Society of Bone and Joint Surgery, and American Diabetes Associations on their website launches. Maya, could you say hi?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
And Raquel Abad is the managing editor at American Society for Enology and Viticulture, where she is responsible for two journals, the American Journal of Enology and Viticulture and Catalyst, Discovery into Practice. AJEV has been in publication since 1950, and Catalyst is ASA's newest publication, having just launched in June 2016. Raquel was the primary point of contact during the simultaneously executed project of the AJEV migration on the HighWire platform to its new service JCore, and on the construction of the new journal website for Catalyst. She worked closely with Maya Summers over the course of the project. Thank you for joining us today, Raquel, to talk about your experience launching your journal websites.
Sure, and hi everyone, I'm happy to be here.
Raquel, could you briefly describe the publications program for ASEV?
Sure. So about our publications, our society has published AJEV for over 50 years, and we publish it quarterly with about 60 articles every year. We recently decided to launch our second journal, which is, as Ann said, Catalyst, Discovery into Practice. You can see on the right-hand side. And we decided to launch this journal to serve our membership and our readers who are, in addition to researchers and academics, we're reaching out also to the vineyard owners and the professionals in the wine industry. So Catalyst is meant to be, to use a term from the medical sciences, translational in nature. So a lot of our members and readers are people outside of academia, whether they're working, like I said earlier, in the field or they might be within the lab. So the purpose of Catalyst is to publish articles that apply the research that's already been discovered. When we were planning the journal and ready to move forward with it, we had already been working with HighWire for a while on AJV, and it was obvious that we should launch the new journal with HighWire as well. So the new journal, Catalyst, just launched in June, and we are about to have, we just had our first 2 articles published. And then about our team, we're a pretty small team. There's 2 of us. I am responsible for overseeing the peer review and the production process, and then overall strategic planning for both journals. And I work in tandem with our society's executive director and the editorial boards. And then the other person on my team is Rosemary, and she's the publications coordinator. So she works on the production process as well. Primarily, she formats the figures and tables and then does article layout. But she and I worked very closely with HighWire together on the website project.
So Raquel, what was the reason that ASAB decided to update the journal websites together recently?
Well, we were thinking about launching AJV on the newer platform for a while, and then when Catalyst came up, that was something we decided we definitely wanted to make the website. So when we approached HighWire, they offered us a discount to do both simultaneously at the same time because we were also launching the new site. And then also because we are such a small staff, it seemed a lot more efficient to go through this process just once and do both at the same time. So then we could deliver a more modern and up-to-date reader experience that worked across both journal sites.
Okay, great. On the topic of delivering a more modern, great reader experience, most readers find their way to a journal article based on a Google search, and they go right to the article page. So let's start there. This is an article page on your new platform with a view that's optimized for a mobile device. What's appealing to you about the HighWire Open Platform article page design?
Well, for one thing, obviously there's more white space, and so there's more focus on the article in the design that we chose. And also what was really nice is that it's a responsive design, so that's automatically built into it, meaning that the display is optimized based on whatever kind of device the reader's using when they're on it, whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, or desktop.
The next view of the site that we'll see has the full desktop view, and readers do like both, and people still do like to download their PDFs, and it seems to be important to optimize for both right now. Maya, could you speak to the choices people can make when they're selecting a design?
Sure. So there's a couple of different ways I can go about it, but HighWire has created a few design templates that is easy to select, and the most popular is probably the one that SF chose, which is Design 3. And the design template uses always the responsive design, so it's optimized based on the viewer, what they're reading it on, and changes dynamically. So that's a nice way to approach their migration, so they don't have to have two sites. And all the templates allow for a variety of ways to tailor the design for the publisher's needs.
What are some of the choices publishers can make when customizing the design to work for their program and their organization?
Well, the publisher can tailor the design from simply designing other color schemes, their logos, et cetera, the layout, and depending on their budget, they may be allowed a wide variety of features. Of course, the look and feel is adapted for every publisher to meet their branding requirements, and there are a lot of ways to bring that out, the branding elements, if that's important to the publisher.
Okay, so going to the sort of desktop view of an article here, you can see that there's a number of reader resources featured on the right. Raquel, what do you like about this view?
Well, my personal favorite is you can see on the right side, the Jump To section. So it's basically a table of contents, and it's really nice because when you have a long article, like when you're looking at the actual HTML text version of the article, rather than having to scroll all the way down to different sections, that little box will just jump down the page as you're scrolling down, so it'll follow along. So if you want to skip from, the abstract maybe down to the literature cited, you can easily just navigate between those sections using that Jump To section, and so you don't have to scroll up and down constantly. And then we also want to encourage our readers to do saving and sharing the articles via email and social media. So you can see kind of towards the top of the page, that is what that box is there. And so it makes it a lot easier for our readers to set up their alerts and receive their alerts. And we've actually seen a lot of interest in the article alerts and the table of content alerts. So it's nice that it's right there on the abstract view.
That's great. As a marketer, I think about, the importance of building that regular communication with people who are interested in your content. So article alerts and email alerts are something that's always important. Maya, have you worked with, you've worked with several publishers in launching new sites. What are some of the features here that they can customize?
On all of our designs, we've made the tools stand out, and that's what you guys were just saying. So they're easier for the readers to use. A cleaner design helps the readers get to the social sharing tools more easily. It's important functionality from the publisher's perspective to help their readers share, cite, and download content. The publishers can choose the placement. So this is where I've seen them customize of the tools to customize their reader tool so they feature what order that they are featured in, meaning some of their readers may use some of the tools more often than others, like alerts versus social sharing, or vice versa. Maybe they know that their readers tend to share via Facebook, and so they want that to be the first one. So those types of things, although they're small, can have a nice impact and a nice customization feature for the publisher.
As a marketer, I think it's really great that you can tailor which types of communications you want to motivate, and also if you understand your reader audience well and know that you're trying to drive behavior on Twitter, you might feature that higher than others. So these little things do make up for a better user experience, and it's great that they're already built in. So moving on to the next slide. This is another level of detail at the article level view. Look how now readers can navigate across the top of article pages to find additional information and resources. Of course, figures and images and tables were always available in articles, but now there's also more information available. Could you speak to this?
Yeah, so as you can see on the slide, the figures and data, the supplemental data, that's all, and the usage metrics, that's all across the top. So it's easy to just go from the article to that information per tab. And then in the box at the bottom, where I believe it says article usage, there's a new feature for the readers and authors to see the number of downloads by PDFs and the online views of full article as well as the abstract views. So this is updated by month. And in this instance that's on the slide, we can see that the number of people that are downloading the PDF and reading the full HTML version online, it's about even, whereas there's many more readers that are simply viewing the abstract. And then on the right-hand side, there's options to choose among additional features. It's simple to use, and it keeps the design really clean. The other articles that are featured are under the, they have the related articles, which is really helpful. In my last job, I was a medical librarian, so we were seeing a lot of our library patrons would come in and we would help them use PubMed, which is a research database. And there on PubMed was a related articles feature as well, which people really used that, I guess that feature a lot. So it's really nice to have that on the new platform as well.
Interestingly, there's been some longitudinal market research done by Simon Inger, which was just updated a few months ago, that supports your comment about the importance of related articles. He found that researchers believe that related articles, the functionality of related articles is one aspect of publishing platforms that has become significantly more useful for content discovery since he last had done his survey in 2012. Maya, could you comment a bit more on discoverability in addition to the aspect of featuring additional articles here? I understand the platform is optimized for indexing by search engines.
Yeah, just to keep it simple, I can say that HighWire builds the design and other aspects of the platform architecture to work with the metadata, et cetera, so that the search engines like Google and Google Scholar can index the content faster so the new articles appear in search results faster. That's really the goal.
Going on to your new homepage, Raquel, what are some of the changes that you like here?
Well, we were really excited about the image carousel, which I think probably draws your attention right there to the U.S. map in the middle. really attention grabbing, but we were really excited about having that. And we also really like that as a publisher with the new platform, we have a lot more control over the content that we feature, and it's easy to feature our issue highlights, which is just immediately under the image carousel. We can update that and feature new articles with every issue on our own terms and without much work needed. So that was a really nice add-on. And then everything that the site is letting us do as a self-service feature, like changing the menu, options, that's really nice to have a little bit more control in that regard. And then with the image carousel, we also have been given a new way that we can engage with our authors. So what we've been doing now that we have this feature is we're asking them to submit the image that they'd want to feature if their article was selected by the editors and issue highlights. So we're asking them that when the article is accepted. And then this is helping us to make them more aware of the issue highlights and also letting them know that we'll add more visibility for their research if the editor does select their article for the highlights.
It's great to give the authors that additional service. Raquel, does it take long to set up?
No, it's actually really quick. And first we just work with our science editor to pull whatever the issue highlights will be for the given issue. And then we either will take the images that the author has already sent us, or if the author hasn't sent us any for that article, then the editor will just select some from the article that will then be put into the carousel. So as a new feature, we just started this about a month ago when we launched, and we've already had authors that have been sending in their images.
That's great. On the next slide, we've got a bit about custom collections, or the how you're featuring specific sets of articles. Could you speak to the custom collection toolkit?
Sure. So when we migrated to our new site, we already had existing collections that we had built. So that was over on our H2O site, and so when we got the JCore site, we just migrated our collections over to the new platform. And we built the menu options up at the top, like those tabs. We built those options to be able to better feature the collections we have so that this the highly valued content is more discoverable by navigation. And then with the new custom collections toolkit, we're really looking forward to building new collections. They make it really easy to do that with the new, I guess, toolkit platform. And so what we've been doing is we're working with our editors to identify some new topics that we think would be of ongoing interest to our readership. And once the topics are selected, then from that point, we select the related keywords for the topics, and then that enables the collection to be automatically updated, which is great because we're all busy, so we don't have to keep tabs on the collections every month or quarterly or whatever and update it manually ourselves. It'll just do that as new articles are published. And so this automated process makes it a lot more manageable especially for a small team like we have here, to build new collections.
Maya, on the next slide, could you speak to a bit about how the custom collection toolkit works?
Sure. It's a simple interface. The custom collection toolkit, or CCTs, you'll hear it referred to a lot, is really simple to use. There's two options, like Raquel mentioned. You can set it up by rule that's tagged with the content keywords and is automatically added to the collection. There's also the flexibility of adding a highly curated list of articles with simply upload feature. So if there's a static list of articles, such as something related to an event or award or something like that, it's simple to set up. And one thing I want to note about moving into the new website, like ASAP with the collections, they actually had started that on H2O, although I think they may not have had that published out on their site. They had them ready, and that moved over to the JCore platform, which just a small note is that content doesn't move. When you are going into JCore, the back end, the content stays where it is, that doesn't move. It's just your front end is changing, so that makes things a lot easier for the publishers. Makes the project go a little bit faster, meaning you don't have to focus in on content. And there are some ways that that some societies or some publishers have taken advantage of the CCT. One example is the Genetic Society of America launched. They tied that in with a 100-year publication. So they wanted to set up a collection of new articles that was at the same time as their launch. So it was a good way to kind of leverage both those things. Other kinds of content that may be reviewed would be information for authors or editorial policies. That if that is part of the project plan and they want to do something a little more focused on that, we just need to factor that into the schedule, and the publisher has control over what they want to update and how they want it to look. So CCT is one of the things to add to that.
Okay, great. So in terms of adding value, you've gotten feedback from several clients about the importance of control over what they can feature and how they can tailor their website. Maya, could you comment on that?
Yeah, our platform allows the publisher to modify several aspects of their website at any time, and Raquel's talked a lot about that. When we start the project, we optimize is based on the publisher's requirements, but over time they may find that they want to feature the feature they thought they wanted at the beginning may change. For example, they may want to update the navigation to include new feature collections like award-winning articles, for example. And of course, Raquel has already pointed out, updating the cover images, featured articles, and issue highlights and other aspects of the site can change any time, so they have full control over changing that. And we provide different containers, and they're called snippets. You'll hear about that when you go into a project. But those containers publishers can decide how they look and what they want to put in them. But also, it gives them that ongoing control of those containers that they have on the site, and which differentiates their site from any other. They decide how they want it to look in terms of matching their brand and other aspects to their site. So we plan it into the architecture, and then they have a lot more freedom to adapt the site the way they want it to look like.
Okay. Sorry, just monitoring for questions. So speaking about the architecture and planning it out, there's a lot that goes into making the website go launch, and there's a lot of considerations as we talked about it. So some of the ingredients to success could be framed in many different ways, but for this conversation, we're framing it in the context of relationships, process, and technology as keys to success. Raquel, what would you say are the most important aspects of the successful launch of your site?
Well, absolutely, I would say regular communication. That was totally critical. We would, Maya and Rosemary and I, we had communication primarily through email and phone. So we had weekly phone calls scheduled, and that was really, really helpful. So we could also talk throughout the week via email if anything came up. And we also had a working document on Google Docs. So that was really efficient because that enables real-time collaboration on the document, and anyone can log in and see it on our team. So that was really a nice tool to have to supplement our communication. The other component that I think was really important is flexibility. So for me, the process was successful because we both, meaning Maya representing HighWire and us representing our society, we both appreciated that there was a give and take that was needed from both sides. So as things would come up, we were both flexible. Can this thing be done? If it can't, how can we work through it? Do we need to change the schedule? Do we need to extend the launch date at all? So everyone involved took a really helpful problem-solving approach when there were new requirements or issues that came up. And then the last thing that I think the other element for success would be conscientiousness. So HighWire was very conscientious through this whole process. They seem to have a really well working formula for the whole timeline and how to navigate through the whole project, and especially how to lead the publisher through it. So on our side as the publisher, that was conscientiousness was very essential as well. We had deadlines that we had to meet and different different documents that we had to complete, and kind of checking our site and seeing if there were any bugs. We had to follow through meeting those deadlines, making sure that we really did the work and carried our weight through the project as well.
Well, thanks, Raquel. That's spoken like a perfect customer. I love it. We are really dedicated, we at HighWire, at helping the publishers launch their site, so they're really happy with it. As a project manager, I think we want to make sure that we establish a strong communication from the very beginning. It's so important. For example, some publishers need a higher touch point, meaning they may want to have like a daily stand-up, which is very doable. Knowing up front what that is and what are the needs of the publisher and what are they comfortable with, that makes all the difference as you move forward. We get into a rhythm from the beginning, and it's important to be able to ask really frank questions and have frank conversations. And that ties in with what Raquel was saying about being conscientious and flexible on both sides. Raquel, I can say from a publisher standpoint, she asked a lot of great questions very early on. And so we had some things that came up later too, but that our relationship was so strong and there was so much trust that those things were always available. She could ask any questions she needed to. And sometimes other stakeholders in the organization may bring something in very late into the game and they want to do something else, they want to change. And Raquel's job on the publisher side is to ask that question. And my response is, she asked, can we do this? And my response was, sure, we can do it. There may be some impact to schedule and such, but the approach was that we want to make sure we do something that works for everyone, and sometimes that requires time, so we just have to extend a schedule, et cetera, and we can do that. The relationship, the partnership as we go through the project is really important, and another important aspect is just making sure that we have some fun along the way, and I think we did. This project was a lot of fun, and all of my projects seem to be fun because the publisher is getting something new. And so we're building something together, and that's the best part of my job, to be honest, and I always look forward to working with my publishers and having those conversations.
Well, clearly you've covered a lot of what goes into building strong relationships. And in terms of technology, we've shown, on the ASAP site, what the technology enables. It's easy to keep it simple and straightforward, or build out features you want and customize it. So projects can be of different scales. For example, designing the navigation and structure for a website that supports 2 journals may be less complex than the approach you would have to take if it was for several journals, like many of the publishers that HighWire works with. But the process is also important, and it needs to be robust and proven and something that people can feel comfortable with, so that you can deliver what's expected. And Raquel mentioned the formula for a flexible project management process is one of the secrets to getting the job done. So I thought, Maya, we could talk a bit more about that, as that's your area of expertise. What would you say the first step is to establishing the goals for the project?
Well, the first thing you need to do is we need to understand what the requirements are. Ideally, the publisher has thought through their requirements. If the publisher has mock-ups of what they want to see, that's great. Then we can both be looking at the same things and discussing them. We can also share some example sites, and that can help some publishers get ideas about what they want to do for their site and what they might want to emulate. As we go through the process of writing up a functional specification, that would be defining all of the pages. It could be all of the pages that are in a mock-up or not. If we can go through the home page, the article page, and all the tertiary pages so that we can define what that shared vision is of what the website needs to look like on every page. That way the publisher and HighWire both understand that we're building what we're building, and we're building it together. So we're starting at the right foot by defining it and going in the same direction.
Raquel, in developing the functional spec, could you speak to the benefits of going through the process?
Yes. So, it was a bit tedious. It was a really detailed form. So there was a lot of detail to think about. And kind of work through. But in retrospect, it was one of those things that even though it was, you kind of had to put the work in to do it, it actually ended up being exceedingly helpful because then you put the time in up front to think through what you want your site to look like and how you want it to be presented and, have that information appear. But once it's done, then you have a shared vision with your project manager at HighWire of how the final project will look.
Absolutely. It makes a big difference in a project when you have all the details.
Maya, when you kick off the functional spec development, could you speak about how you approach building it? Do you give the publisher some examples and things to consider and just, what they need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. When we create the functional spec, we use a Google Doc, which the benefit of that is having a live document that both of us can go into and be working on at the same time. So we have access to real time, same time. That makes a difference from a Word doc, which you'd have to do in email and is inefficient. It's a living document. The publisher may be able to put questions in as we're doing updates, and I can answer those questions. It makes it a very useful tool. So you're having even conversations. You can go through it and go back to what their questions were when they were reviewing it. We also may look at some example sites so the publisher can understand what it is we're talking about in a document. They may see some real examples in live sites. That way they can better decide what they want.
Raquel, you had a small project team, but could you speak to how you involved stakeholders like your editorial team as you were building the functional spec?
Sure. So I touched base with our stakeholders, which included primarily our executive director and our science editor. So I would regularly touch base with them throughout the process, and sometimes it would just be a simple update about what's going on in our project, or sometimes decisions actually would need to be made, and I would need to get their opinion. So regularly communicating with them was key. It made it so that at the end of the project there were no surprises.
No surprises in a project is always a good thing. And thinking about your approach of the going in position for goals, you also talked about the importance of not having to reinvent the wheel. So could you speak a little bit about that?
Yes. So when we were going into this project, we had a pretty strict budget, a defined budget that we had to work within, as well as a limited and defined time frame for when we had to launch the sites. So as I mentioned, our manpower to work on the project, it was just the two of us, so myself and Rosemary. So that was also kind of a limiting factor, of course. But then in the meantime, we also had our regular job duties to perform and, get the journal issues published and kind of go through all of our regular workday activities as well. So we kind of had a few things to juggle in that regard. And as a result, we tried to keep it pretty standard and reuse what we already had, and also take advantage of the new features that the J-Core platform, the update, what it would offer, like the image carousel and the collections toolkit. So given the budget and the manpower and our time frames that we had to work within, I personally think that we really accomplished a lot with our new site. I do know that some of the journals on HighWire, I've seen some of them, and they're extremely customized, but with our case and given kind of what we had to work within, we decided to keep ours pretty straightforward with not a whole lot of customization, and we really are happy with the result.
Could you speak to the other publishers you work with related to the topic of customization?
Sure. I think it's important to understand from HighWire's perspective, what we need to understand is the drivers for the publisher. So this may be when we're considering a customization, we need to understand if the publisher is schedule driven. That's going to have an impact. And if it's going to be very custom, then we have to think through what can be achieved within a time frame. And that's very important. The other way around, if they're driven primarily by the customizations themselves and the enhancements they want to build into their site, then we have to spend a lot of time on full discovery of those requirements and the impact to any kind of schedule that we can build out for them. It's very important from the very beginning. This is what HighWire focuses in the beginning to make sure that we're clear about what we can deliver and when. But that doesn't mean that requirements don't change during the course of the project. As Raquel said, sometimes other stakeholders come in or new requirements come up, and that can be evaluated, and there's a process for that. But anybody who runs a project wants the requirements to stay consistent, of course, but at HighWire we can accommodate what comes up. It's important that the publisher gets what they want, that they need for their site, and that they feel comfortable with the whole process. And I think Raquel is correct. They were very concise and knew what they needed, and we stayed focused on that, and it was really helpful. And I think that one thing that came up that we had at the end, but we handled it really well, and it made it was a change to the homepage, so it actually delayed our launch just by a couple of weeks, but it was an easy adjustment, and we just were clearly communicating about it, and we were able to accommodate it. So it was a good example of having a clear vision and then just communicating and being flexible as we go forward.
So speaking about clear communications, especially when dealing with changes, Maya, could you speak a bit more to the approach that you take when communicating on projects?
Right. So we typically start off our projects with the publisher and our counterpart to ourselves. So usually somebody that's leading the project from the publisher standpoint. And we figure out what's going to work best as far as communicating. And we talked a little bit about that earlier, and that minimally we want to talk at least once a week. Sometimes that's more frequently. It just depends on the complexity of what you're doing. It depends on the amount of customizations, et cetera. Sometimes more touch points, and I mentioned this earlier, are more helpful. Some publishers feel more comfortable with a daily stand-up, and I mentioned that earlier too. They just want to know where we're at and if there's anything that needs to be addressed for that particular day or time. And I think that can be really helpful. For this project, we communicated, once a week, and then we had a lot of emails, and we were very, very flexible and open in communication. It went really well. We kept us on our task and schedule and kept things moving forward to address anything that potentially was open. And we had some tools, we talked about that, for feedback. We had a feedback sheet. Again, it was in Google, so real time. As Raquel said, they could see answers to questions, et cetera, so it was really helpful. So we were able to answer questions specifically about things that are going on in between meetings.
Raquel, could you speak to the communication from your perspective?
Yeah, so we had weekly calls, like we talked about already, and that was a really, really good strategy, I thought, to just kind of keep in touch and touch base. And sometimes there wasn't a whole lot to cover, so those calls were short. We were never on the phone just to kind of fill time. We always would just deal with whatever we had to address and just move on. So there was definitely a feeling of transparency, and this process and the communication really helped us establish a nice rapport, which enabled us to work really well together in between when we had to communicate via email. And as everyone knows, sometimes email can be difficult for collaboration, so supplementing that with the calls really helped everything gel. And the calls really helped us work through what was a realistic timeline and how we could work towards that.
Speaking of timelines, delivering a website on schedule is a critical success factor, so let's address that next. Thinking it through, Maya, could you previously mentioned that sometimes an organization may be schedule-driven in their decision-making for their website launch, and that could be related to a conference or another milestone for the organization, but a project manager is always schedule-driven. So could you speak to what goes into building a schedule for a website launch?
Sure. So going into building a schedule, if the publisher is schedule-driven by a specific go-live date, then we have to work backwards from there, which is, in my world, is not ideal, but we can do that. And things we have to take into consideration are what are those events and activities going on? Are there holidays in between, people being out of the office? So those things really impact the schedule. Knowing those up front is really important. There may be organizational meetings and such that people have to attend, so we have to take that into consideration. And will they be juggling other higher priorities in their world? Also impacts the schedule, as the publisher also has tasks associated to the project, so they need to be able to do that in a timely manner. Make sure they're available for that. So we factor that into the schedule. If I'm building out a schedule and I need to have the publisher review the website a certain specific time, and that we need to make sure that in those periods we've identified, again, just if they have any conflict. So it's critical path and resources need to be figured out and make sure the schedule works with both the publisher and their team and the stakeholders. Really important to identify that.
And what about during the launch period?
So that is also obviously highly critical, and we definitely need to have the key players both on HighWire and the publisher side available for launch. So pretty much the 2 weeks before launch I think is really critical, and the 2 weeks post-launch is critical for the publisher side. So making sure that the publisher is ready for prep to go live, and then they have the resources they need after it go live. Make sure that we can work through anything that comes up.
Okay, so coming back to the technology, just briefly again, putting it all together, we've talked a lot about the aspects of the platform, and we've also talked about how publishers appreciate that they have more control over their website. But going from web concept all the way to implementation and taking control is really a process. So I thought it would just be helpful to touch on how the technology, schedule, and project all come together to support the publisher as they take control over their website. So starting with the functional spec, and then there's several stages to get ready to go live and avoid having any surprises, as Raquel said. Could you describe the process?
Sure. At HighWire, we take the At HighWire, we take the functional spec, and then we start building out this website, and that we build out on a developed environment. Once it goes through QA, we release it, or quality assurance, we release it to the publisher on a staging server. And this comes pretty early in the process, so they can actually get into the nitty-gritty. And that staging process is an actual website where they're able to access it behind a password authentication. They get in and are able to review the colors and all of the way their site is going to look, and then what their decisions are. And we actually bring in the functional spec at that time to make sure we're kind of making sure those elements are in there, that we've defined it well. Raquel, how do you think that worked for you?
I think it was great, especially you gave us training early on about how to use and edit the site, I guess based on we were working with the staging site at that point. But it was basically, the functionality is exactly the same as when you go live. So it was really helpful to have that training and give us some time so we could use the tools and then play with the site and see how it worked and, come up with any questions that we might have. So the demo site was really where we learned how to use those editing tools, and once we went live, we were ready to go.
And that's great. That's a great time for us to refer back to the functional spec and make sure if there's any questions that come up. If all the decisions that were made at the beginning and the look and feel works, then we're nearly there, and that's a good. This beta stage is a good time to go through that. And the site, just note, is closed off and it's only accessible by the publisher and whoever they choose to share the link and the authentication with to get their feedback. So internally, they may have some folks that they send that to. Once we have those things defined and we have everything kind of fine-tuned, we put it into pre-production state. And that will be the environment where it's actually going to be the same environment where it goes live. So the publisher can see exactly the site and the environment it's going to be in when they go live.
Okay. How long before the go-live date did you put it into pre-production?
Oh, that actually depends. There's a couple of different factors, the time of year and the complexity, right? So it will vary at a minimum of a few weeks, very, very much a minimum, but more likely a month or so. Depends. Example, a lot of publishers want to launch the beginning of the year. So if we do that, you have the holidays, obviously, that take up a few weeks. A lot of organizations are shut down. So typically, we only have a few weeks pre-production. You fit in the holiday there, and it may be about a month or more of pre-production time if it's around the holiday. So it could be as early as November to give everyone enough time to get ready for go live. So we just want to make sure that we're in a very solid, stable state before we go live.
Okay. Raquel, could you speak to that, that when you were launching?
Yeah. So for us, it turned out that Rosemary, my colleague, was out of the office for about a week around launch time. But it ended up working out just fine. In the end, Maya and I were able to figure out what we had to do in between for us to go live.
Okay. So moving on to the secrets of success, we've covered a lot of ground on relationships and the process and technology. And just to recap your big takeaways, Raquel, what would you say are your concluding thoughts on the secrets to success?
I think the biggie for me would be conscientious and, stay on task, do your work and stick to the plan. And then kind of what I talked about earlier about flexibility, just understanding that it's a give and take for all stakeholders and everyone is working towards the same goal to provide a great reader experience.
And Maya?
I think number one is not being afraid to ask questions and feel like it's always okay to go and ask us questions and ask lots of them. Make sure that you get a shared understanding, that we have a shared understanding so that we can solve your problems and address your needs as they change.
Okay, so for this successful implementation of a project, you need trust in the people that you're working with, which is earned in many ways, as you've talked about, and the robust, proven process and technology solutions that fit the need are really important to deliver a great website. And I just want to remember back to what Maya said, that having fun building something new together is also a secret ingredient. But going back to Maya's point about asking great questions, we do have a number of questions now, and some of them we don't have necessarily the right person on the call to answer the questions, so we'll follow up separately. But a couple things that are related specifically to this this website launch that maybe Maya and Raquel, you could address. The question was, how did the scheduling of the development and staging periods work out for the Catalyst journal, because there was no content yet available to work with?
Good one.
Yes. Who should take that?
Well, I can tell you how we'll bounce off each other, but we do have sample content. So Raquel, early on, we built that into the schedule. So they did have some sample content that they gave us that would mimic exactly how their live content was going to come in. So we were able to work up the site with content, although it wasn't live content, so that we had everything in place. So when they did have actual live content, it was going to flow in and they would already know how it looked and be able to make sure that was refined prior. So I don't know if Raquel, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, that was, I'm trying to remember. There are a few things that I think we were, right. The one thing that we weren't sure if we wanted to do was if we wanted to launch the site live at the same time as we launched HAEV live. So we kind of went back and forth with our editorial board about, if we don't have any content, should we actually make the site available? So I think what we ended up doing was that we had it live, but we didn't have the URL. Was that what we did? I think so, right? No,
I think you didn't. Yeah, the URL was live, but you didn't push people there. So there wasn't a big flag saying, "Hey, look at our new site."
Yeah,
so it was there, just wasn't advertised.
Yeah, and nobody was able to get to it, obviously, because they didn't. They could in theory, but they didn't have the URL. And then in the meantime, when we were kind of had it behind the scenes but live, what we did was we created a temporary web page on our society's website for the Catalyst, where authors or potential authors could go, where they could find the guide to authors and the copyright agreement form and kind of the pertinent information that they needed. They could go there, and then once we had some content, then we made the site live and took down the temporary site. Well, the site was live, but we advertised the URL.
There's another question. There's a number of other questions that these might be a little complicated to ask, but they're really related to the whole process of the beta testing and the evaluation of the content before the go live stage. Really, can you describe that process a little bit in more detail of what's expected of the publisher at that time, Maya?
I'm not sure I'm clear.
I guess a person was asking, is the publisher sort of expected to look at all of the content that migrates? Or
I see what you're saying. Okay, so yeah, that's a good question, because I think in previous migrations in HighWire history, they may have moved content on servers and such that caused a little bit of concern because there were some things that came up. That does not happen in a migration to JCore. So that should not be a concern. However, there are some things that I typically point out to a publisher early on, because if they have a lot of history, and what happens is there's kind of a microscope on their content once they do a migration, they may find things just because they're looking. They existed on H2O, they have existed on their content. There may be some weird bugs with older content. So what I ask them to do, and ask a publisher to do, is pick a sample of all the different kinds of content that you might have. They know, the publisher is very, very intimate with their content. They know when they may have different types of content that they're serving up, when they may have had changes in their content over time. So I'd ask them to pick a sample set, and then we can work that up very quickly onto a site so they can see, in JCore, here's what it's going to look like, and we can deal with any kind of anomalies that may be out there. I think that's the best approach. They do not need to look at every single bit of content. On a new journal, I think there's definitely more focus on the content. So they do want to set aside, and we work that into the schedule. So we work with the publishers, working through how long is it going to take for them to do their review. And we may have to factor in other stakeholders of the organization that need to do that review with them. Because it's a new journal, there's potentially a higher need there for the publisher side. So just they should keep that in mind, and we can, if they wanted to, we could discuss that more in detail offline.
Yeah, I will follow up with the questions that are on there's some that are more detailed specifically, so there's definitely some interest in getting a better understanding of that process and how I much like you've said over and over, Maya, every project manager on a migration project will consider all the requirements of the publisher and schedule, and the amount of review and what's involved in user acceptance is all part of planning the project out. So it all goes built into the timeline. So if the publisher wants to do more evaluation or there's more complexity to the content that they have, you just need to build in more time for that launch period of review, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I think that covers quite a number of the questions that we can respond to in the time that we have with the team on this call. We will be following up with with all of the panelists, all of the attendees who did ask questions. And I want to thank you both for your contributions today, and congratulations on launching a great site. And thank you again, all of the attendees who've come to this webinar. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Anne, for putting this on, putting it together.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Raquel and Maya. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.